32 of the most powerful nations on the planet just agreed to spend such a huge amount of money on weapons that it could feed entire countries for decades. We're talking about a military investment bigger than anything we've seen since the Cold War. NATO just announced that its members will have to invest no less than 5% of their gross domestic product in defense, more than double what they used to spend before. To get an idea of how big this decision is, the United States alone is expected to invest over $1.3 trillion a year. That's enough money to buy Mexico's entire GDP, twice over. But here's the detail no one's openly talking about. This decision didn't come out of nowhere. Behind this historic change is brutal political pressure coming straight from the White House, led by Donald Trump, and a geopolitical situation forcing the West to bare its teeth at Vladimir Putin's Russia. To understand the magnitude of this decision, we need to go back a few months in time. Since Trump returned to the presidency in January 2025, one thing was clear: he wasn't willing to keep footing the bill for Europe's security alone. Throughout his campaign, Trump kept hammering the same point: Americans were tired of paying the European defense bill, while allies didn't do their part. The pressure reached a point where Trump threatened that the U.S. could drastically reduce its military presence in Europe if NATO countries didn't significantly boost their defense spending. It wasn't a diplomatic suggestion, it was practically an ultimatum. On the other side of the Atlantic, the situation in Ukraine kept draining resources and international attention. Russia, even facing heavy economic sanctions, maintained its aggressive stance and kept military spending at sky-high levels. The Kremlin was investing around 7.2% of its GDP in military defense, a number that kept Western leaders losing sleep. It was in this tense scenario that the NATO summit took place on June 24th and 25th, 2025, in The Hague, Netherlands. The meeting brought together heads of state and defense ministers from all 32 member countries, but everyone knew the real pressure came from Washington. Trump showed up at the summit with a clear agenda: get the commitment from each member country to spend 5% of their GDP on defense. During negotiations, sources close to the talks said the American president went straight to the point: either the allies take on their financial responsibilities, or the U.S. will rethink its role in the alliance. The final decision surprised even some of the more experienced analysts. NATO not only agreed to the increase, but structured the investment strategically. 3.5% of GDP would go to what they call traditional defense, meaning buying weapons, training troops, modernizing military equipment, and strengthening strategic presence in risky regions. The remaining 1.5% would be spent on critical infrastructure, protecting digital networks, cybersecurity, and bolstering civilian systems. This split reveals something fundamental about modern conflicts. We're no longer just talking about tanks and fighter jets. NATO is getting ready to face hybrid threats, cyber attacks, economic sabotage, disinformation campaigns, and other kinds of confrontations that don't necessarily involve troops on the battlefield. Right now, NATO countries account for about 55% of all global military spending. The United States alone represents about 36% of that total. China is second with 12%, and Russia accounts for 5.7%. With this new 5% target, this imbalance will get even more dramatic. We're talking about an alliance that could control over 60% of the world's military spending. For historical perspective, not even at the height of the Cold War was there such a huge concentration of military power in a single bloc of countries. But reaching this target won't be easy. Countries like Poland, which because of its strategic location and proximity to Russia already spends more than 3.5% of its GDP on military, welcomed the decision. On the other hand, nations like Spain showed significant resistance. The Spanish government publicly declared it will keep a 2.1% GDP cap for defense, creating the first big crack in the alliance's unity. This division reveals an internally fragmented NATO. On one side, Eastern European countries see the increase as an urgent need given the Russian threat. On the other, Western European nations face internal political resistance and economic struggles to justify such a big military spending hike. While the West mobilizes for this historic military spending boost, Russia faces an increasingly challenging economic reality. The international sanctions imposed since the Ukraine conflict began are finally showing their deepest effects. According to recent data, Russia is spending about 7.2% of its GDP on military defense, which in absolute terms means roughly $149 billion a year. But here's the problem. While the numbers look impressive, the Russian economy is operating in what economists call total mobilization economy mode. That means practically all available resources are being funneled into the military effort, leaving other parts of the economy in the background. Economic analysts say nearly all non-military sectors of the Russian economy are showing zero growth or even decline. The situation became so unsustainable that even Vladimir Putin, in a statement that shocked the world on June 27th, suggested Russia might consider cutting its military spending in the coming years. For many observers, this wasn't a goodwill gesture but rather an acknowledgement that Russia's economy is nearing its limits. Sanctions imposed by the European Union and the US are working more effectively than many initially expected. Around 20 billion euros in assets from more than 1,500 sanctioned individuals and entities have been frozen. But the impact goes way beyond the numbers. Russia is facing a critical labor shortage, with unemployment rates at historically low levels of 2.4%, not because the economy is booming, but because a significant portion of the workforce has been mobilized for the military effort or emigrated. On top of that, inflation is eating away at Russian citizens' purchasing power. Experts warn that if the Russian currency keeps depreciating and inflation keeps rising, even soldiers who are well paid for fighting might lose their financial motivation, which is one of the Kremlin's main incentives to keep forces engaged. NATO's new stance isn't just about numbers and budgets. It's about sending a clear message to the whole world. Any act of aggression will be met with overwhelming force. One official spokesperson at the summit said it straight: Putin isn't ready to compete with the combined economic and military power of the West. This deterrent strategy aims to stop adversaries from even thinking about aggression, whether military, cyber, or informational. The core idea is to show that any hostile act will be met with a crushing response, no matter where it happens. But the message isn't just for Russia. NATO is making it clear to any country thinking about testing the limits of European security or Western presence in tense zones like the Baltics, the Balkans, or the Arctic that the response will be immediate and devastating. One thing is certain: with this new guideline, NATO is cementing its position as the most powerful military alliance in modern history. The impact of this decision goes far beyond European and American borders. Countries like China, which has been trying to expand its influence in the Pacific, might see their regional ambitions frustrated by a stronger, more united NATO. For Russia's allies like Iran, North Korea, and Venezuela, this escalation represents a big challenge. These countries might feel pressured to boost their own military spending or look for alternative ways to respond to growing Western military superiority. Geopolitically, we're seeing a return to a bloc mentality that reminds us of the Cold War, but with completely new features. Modern conflicts don't just involve territories and traditional armies, but satellites, information networks, digital infrastructure, and even the manipulation of social media algorithms. The path to implementing this ambitious goal is long and full of hurdles. By mid-2026, each country must present a detailed plan to reach the 5% defense investment. These plans have to include specific timelines, funding sources, military industry sectors to strengthen, and measurable intermediate goals. In 2029, there will be a full official review, a real moment of truth to assess each nation's progress and make any course corrections. But the final goal remains unchanged: full implementation by 2035. But the challenges are huge. Governments will have to deal with already tight budgets, pressure from social sectors demanding investments in education and health, and the need to develop military and tech industries on a large scale. Some countries may literally have to rebuild their defense industrial capabilities from scratch. What makes this NATO decision even more significant is the recognition that 21st century conflicts are fundamentally different from anything we've seen before. We're no longer just talking about deterring enemies with tanks and fighter jets. Now, fights happen on multiple fronts at once: the internet infrastructure, public narrative, satellites, and even algorithms. The split between investments in traditional defense and hybrid security shows NATO gets this reality. A modern war might start with a cyber attack that takes down a country's power grid, followed by a social media disinformation campaign, and only then maybe involve conventional military forces. We're witnessing a deep transformation in how the West views its security. But this raises important questions that go beyond politics and military strategy. Are we really safer with this massive military spending increase, or are we just creating an environment where any small spark can turn into a global fire? NATO's decision is both a show of strength and a recognition of vulnerability. It shows the West is willing to invest trillions to keep its dominant position, but it also reveals genuine concern about adversaries like Russia and China challenging that established order. What happens in the coming years will define not only the global power balance, but also the kind of world we'll leave to future generations. Will it be a safer world through deterrence, or a more dangerous one through escalation? The answer to that question is still being written, and we're all part of that story. The global geopolitical game is just getting started, and these NATO moves are only the opening move of a match that promises to rewrite the rules of international security for decades to come. If you want to keep following the behind the scenes of this new geopolitical era and understand how these decisions directly affect your daily life, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. And don't forget to comment below. Your opinion matters, and we want to know what you think about the future we're building. Thanks a lot for watching till here, and I'll see you on the next battlefield front.